Shall I take the wheel and start sharing my screen?
Sure, yeah, please do. So I mentioned at the top, really, Robbie is from Yakima Chief Hops, a sort of grower-owned company. That's, I think previously mainly US based, but he'll correct me on that in a minute. But they're now coming to the UK homebrew market, which is quite exciting. So yeah, take it away, Robbie.
Great. So please forgive me. I'm not familiar with Zoom. I use Teams, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen and not share something I shouldn't. So bear with me. Okay. So could you all see the main screen? Can you see my presenter screen?
Yeah, you can see. See PowerPoint.
Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, today it'd be good to do a few of these. There's numerous topics we can touch on. One that's probably really relevant to the homebrew market is Cryo hops. It's a proprietary product to us. It's not something that I think has been widely available in the homebrew market before, unless some of you have been traveling to the Pacific Northwest and muling hops back or whatever else. So I'm just going to go through just the background on it, how to use it, why you should use it. I'll try and keep it informational, but my job is to sell hops, so it's going to be a little bit sales based as well, if you don't mind. But there's good reason for it. So yeah, I was going to introduce the company. So yeah, as James said, I'm from Yakima Chief Hops. Worked for these guys for just over a year. I'm based up in Worcester in the West Midlands. Predominantly, again, as James said, we were based out of the Pacific Northwest. But now we've got a fully fledged, fully rooted European operation. We've just opened a new facility just south of Brussels. That's going to be our new European storage and distribution centre. We start every presentation with just an overview of who we are and what we're about. We like to think we are different to some of the hop suppliers that are currently in the market. So as the screen says here, our mission is to connect our family hop farms with the world's finest brewers and home brewers, which is most important, to provide them with the highest quality hop products. Yep.
I think you're showing your screen rather than the presenter one. We're just seeing like PowerPoint as you would edit the slides.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess you just moved on to a different slide then. We're still looking at the...
I have indeed, yeah. See, not familiar with Zoom. Bear with me just a second. How's that one? Is that any better? Can you see me move between
better.
those? That's the one. You see me move between them, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Right. Sorry about that. So as I say, we want to provide the highest quality hop products to brewers and home brewers across the world. And ultimately our vision as any company will be is to be the global hop supplier of choice. We're very focused on being mindful of our community, of others around us. We want our commitment to healthy communities to be reflected in every beer brewed with our hops, regardless of levels, whether it's the biggest breweries in the world or down to home brewer level as well, which is really important. Everyone's equally important. We've got a few of our values just below there. So passion, respect, integrity, dedication, and excellence. We want to be more than just a hop supplier. We want to interact with communities and sort of represent our communities and our backgrounds and things like that. So all of these are super important to what we do and sort of guide us on that path. So yeah, again, as James mentioned at the start, if you can see our selection of growers there, we are the world's only 100% grower-owned hop company. Which is really important. Some of our grower owners have been farming in the Pacific Northwest since the 19th century. So, there's a fair bit of experience picked up along the way. And all this experience, ultimately goes down into producing what we think are the highest quality American hops in the world. So, yeah, as well as our grower owners, we also work with around 50 other families in the Pacific Northwest to purchase our hops from and supply our hops. So we want to create a real network of growers and farmers, again, in order to produce and provide the highest quality hops. So a bit of background on what we do in the market. So 2021 crop, we received approximately 40 million pounds worth of hops, which is about 18,000 metric tons. And and this represents about 40% of the US crop. Our 15 grower owners provided about 56% of this, and the allied growers, as mentioned before, provided the rest. We're about 290 to 300 full-time employees worldwide. We've got facilities in, obviously, the Pacific Northwest, in Belgium, in Hong Kong, and we work with a distributor in Melbourne as well. So we try and cover as much of the globe as possible. And as the craft beer bubble keeps expanding, we hope to expand with it, and bring these hops to all corners of the globe, really. So one of our real sort of points of difference is that we have a return to grower scheme. So estimate that 70% of the revenues from last year's hop sales is returned directly to the farms and the growers. So we can continue to invest in infrastructure, machinery. If we want to grow more citra, we might need to install new kilns, new picking machines, new drying facilities. It's all part of a sort of a bigger picture. So we're fairly confident that no other hop company is able to sort of reinvest that much at a farm level. So that's something that we really like to shout about, really, because it's something that's really important. So as I say, the main focus of this presentation, and at any time, feel free to stop me, shout up. If you've got any questions, we'll have some Q&A at the end for sure. Focusing on Cryo today, but we can discuss anything about hops or Yakima Chief. I'll be more than happy to stick around for some questions.
So are the growers, is it all US growers, the ones that are
all US growers? Yeah. We have actually sort of fairly recently, in the last 6 weeks or so, just partnered with a family hop farm in New Zealand, who are long-standing friends of one of our founding families. So we've got Mac hops down in New Zealand. So from the next couple of years, we will actually be offering some New Zealand hops as well as part of our portfolio. So, but yeah, all the growers that own the operation or are part of the operation at the moment are based in the Pacific Northwest. So the 3 hop growing states of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. So that's where we're centered. Yeah, cryo hops. So I assume you may have all heard of cryo hops, or maybe some of you haven't heard of cryo hops, but yeah, it's a proprietary product to us. There's other similar products on the market that try and do the same thing, but they're all somewhat different. So a bit of background on where it came from and how we got to where we are now. So in 2015, sort of the prototypes of cryo hops were first produced. And in 2016, we made the first quantities available to commercial breweries to trial them. It was kind of no coincidence that around this time, there's a real explosion, an explosion that's still exploding, still growing in the rise of these sort of New England styles, the hazy, juicy, hop beer styles that are extremely hop forward, which cryo hops are, perfect for. But it's important to note that you can use these in any beer style, from a Pilsner to a West Coast to a red ale, to a hoppy stout if you really wanted to. There's no limits. Some of you may or may not remember that they're originally offered in a powder form. It's called cryo powder. Some commercial breweries really struggled to process this. It tended to kind of float in the wort or the beer and was very, very difficult to get into solution. So sort of 2017 onwards, our engineers kind of reviewed it, redeveloped it, and looked to produce this into a pellet form, which was much more usable within the brew house and caused far less issues. We offer pretty much the whole range of our products in cryo. So from the newest varieties such as Sabro and Talus to even more old school varieties, your Cascades, Centennials, Chinooks of this world. And the process was developed in a way that it could be adjustable and bespoke to each hop variety. Every hop variety has different characteristics in terms of oil breakdown, oil composition, and therefore needs to be treated slightly differently as it's produced. So the process itself is adaptable to each different hop variety. So sort of breaking news, really. Within the last 4 weeks or so, it's been fully patented, which means I'm pleased to say I can talk more freely about it without worrying you guys muling information, sneaking information off to our competitors. It's a fully patented cryogenic. So yeah, given the name, there's some cold temperatures involved. And basically the To boil it down, it's a separation process. It's about separating the leaf and vegetable material of the hop cone and the lupulin material into two separate fractions. On the right here, if you can see my pointer, if you see these lupulin glands under a microscope, small sort of hexagonal particles which contain all of the oils and resins that we want to keep. The idea is to preserve those and capture as much of those as possible while also separating them. So one thing that's key to us, and as the name suggests, each component of the hop is preserved using liquid nitrogen, which gives extremely low temperatures, but also extremely low oxygen throughout the process, from the initial separation process to final pelleting and packaging. So throughout this process, as you can see here, where the standard whole cone hops that have been dried off the kiln are first, excuse me, used into the process, liquid nitrogen is added, and there's a separation process here, and they are then pelleted into the final packaging, which I know some of you guys got to look at some cryo about a couple of weeks ago, and I've heard lots of oohs and ahs, so obviously it works. You know, as I say, it's about capturing as much of that lupulin, as much of that aroma and flavor compounds as possible into the final product. Yeah, I'll expand on this process in a bit more detail in the next couple of slides, but essentially, as I say, it's all about the separation process and separating those two fractions and preserving and retaining as much of that into the final product. So yeah, just an overview of the pellets themselves. The reason for coming up with cryo is, you know, the growers are producing some of the most aromatic and delicious hops in the world, and we were trying to find a way to capture as much of that into a final product. T90 pellets have been around, you know, for decades, and they're still excellent. But what can we do? What methods can we look at to, you know, to capture more and retain more into the pellet, and therefore introduce more of that hop aroma into beer? So, yeah, that was kind of the reason looking at it. And sort of the key thing here is that there's no, like some products on the market, there's no real special processes involved. You can just use those wherever you use type 90 pellets or even whole cone hops and get great results, I hope. Sort of the advantages of using them, yeah, you look at nearly twice the resin content of conventional T90 hop pellets, you know, increased and intense contribution of hop flavor and aroma. And as that vegetable and bract material is removed at production, you'll see a reduced amount of grassy and vegetal characteristics, which can become unpleasant, especially when producing, you know, beers that have been heavily dry hopped, you know, especially some of these New England styles, or even just a more West Coast leaning style. You know, you see some dry hop rates at 20 plus grams per litre. You do always flirt with introducing some of these really green, grassy characteristics, which in small quantities can contribute pleasant aromas for sure, pleasant flavours, but in large quantities can often make the beer be quite astringent and unpleasant. So, you know, you're adding predominantly lupulin, which is just going to be the more citrus, fruit, tropical characteristics. And kind of a secondary advantage, which is almost a bit of a freebie, is you know, increased yields. Obviously, we work with commercial breweries globally. Some of the biggest breweries in the world, some of the biggest brewing groups, down to some 5-barrel microbreweries, and now, you know, yourselves at homebrew level. And we see essentially less hop material going in to the vessel. In terms of usage, we look at about a 50% by weight reduction in the amount of material you're putting in. So breweries generally have reported sort of an average of a 3 to 5% increase in sort of fillable beer, which at any level is great, but you know, if you're producing hundreds of thousands of hectolitres a year, that's pretty enormous, really. Even if you're brewing a 25-litre batch, you might squeeze a few more bottles out of that batch, but you know, every little helps, as they say. So you know, if you can get more beer in there that's just as aromatic, then you know, it's a bit of a freebie, isn't it? So yeah, obviously these are produced for aroma and flavour, but yeah, some extra beer at the end of the day is no bad thing. So sort of to demonstrate this, anyone who came to BrewCon, I do recognise a few of your faces, may have seen we have 2 pint glasses filled with sort of green sludge. Essentially, it's a nice little visual demo of how this works. See it on the left, we've got 10 grams of T90, and going off of our sort of recommendation of using them at 50% the rate of T90, we've got 5 grams of cryo pellets in the glass. We've just used room temperature water here, so this is after 30 minutes, where obviously still a lot of material in suspension, but you can start to see some sedimentation already. And then moving on to this slide, you'll see that after 90 minutes, it's quite a substantial difference in sediment. So if you imagine that's your fermenter or even your conditioning tank, it's quite a marked difference there. You'll notice here that the sediment is generally a lot finer. I don't know if you rubbed some of the cryo hops when I came a couple of weeks ago, you'll notice that they were very, very soft, but also the particles were quite small and consistent in size, which really helps get a more compact, more consistent sediment. Whereas on here, you'll notice that with T90, you can get some variances in particle size, which can cause these cavities and these gaps where air still remains, which stops the sediment forming correctly. So regarding the matter at the top, I think that's just a result of the vessel they've used. In a conical vessel or even a sort of more of a conventional fermenter, you probably wouldn't see that cling to the top there. So disregard that for this example. But yeah, just a nice visual demonstration. If you imagine that's a 2,000 litre tank, of the difference in beer or wort that you're going to get compared to the sediment.
Robbie, you said there that the cryo is obviously it's finer, which I'm sure it is. I was wondering as well, like, are the T90 that you're doing finer as well? Because the samples that when I put the sample you gave the Sabro the packet you gave me at the meeting into a beer a couple of days later to dry hop it, and I found the pellets were a lot more squidgy. And when they went into the fermenter as well, they were sort of they seemed to come out a bit finer as to what was sort of left over. So it was like they were already sort of finer and more sort of, well, I don't know really. They just, whereas what I'm used to is like these hard pellets, which sort of they almost snap into. These things were like sort of squidgy, and so that's and sort of you could squidge them apart quite easily. So, and they were meant to be the T90. So is there sort of a difference how you're handling those as well?
Yeah, that's mainly related. We'll touch on that actually towards the end, but it's a great point. That's more related to the temperature the hops are pelletized at. At higher temperatures, you run the risk of almost cooking the hops and sort of cooking the oils and the resins in there, which you almost bake them solid.
You get that sheen on the outside of a lot of
so if you guys
just the heat from the dye, isn't it? So
exactly that. So if you've ever seen pellets that almost have like a glassy appearance on the outside, that's generally because they've been pelleted and or stored at incorrect temperatures, i.e. too high. So we, as I mentioned before, we use liquid nitrogen throughout the process, especially on Cryo, but also on T90, we will run liquid nitrogen through the actual face of the pellet die to ensure that temperatures are within spec. It's a fine balance of keeping it warm enough to actually form a pellet. You want some warmth in there to kind of set the pellet, but you don't want it too warm because you will then look at flashing off and sort of evaporating some of these volatile aroma compounds, and also removing some moisture in there, which is why you see some pellets which are, baked hard and it's almost snappable, for want of a better term. I've come across some of those, and you'll find sometimes you could chuck them into your FE and they just sink straight to the bottom like stones. They don't dissolve, and therefore they don't impart any aroma or flavour. So it's something we're really proud of, the quality of our pellets. We would say they are, and I'd like to think you guys might agree, having smelt some of the hops, we think they're some of the highest quality hops globally. And we're really pleased to actually get them to you directly. So it's a great point, James. I think I can't comment on what other hop suppliers do, but we do try and produce a nice fine pellet material, but it's more about consistency as well. I've seen some pellets and I've used some pellets where you might break them apart and there's some larger particles in there, there's some smaller particles in there. Some bits come out and float on the top, bits of twig or bits of leaf. So it's all about, consistency of material, which helps with this kind of sedimentation here, both in the T90 and in the Cryo especially. So So yeah, I mean, obviously this presentation is predominantly aimed at commercial breweries, but it all you know, it's all the same conversation really. So I'm not sure many of you are tracking your costs brew on brew or year on year, but some of you might be. So you know, you can see a cost saving and increase in production over a year. The advantages compared to other products is, you know, we're pleased to say it's a patented process. So we've got these pellets that are so concentrated in oil and alpha acids for greater brewing efficiency, but also a better product at the end of it. And as I mentioned just then, that low temperature, low oxygen environment and minimal handling as well produces a product that's higher of quality, more stable, and more full of aromas and flavors. So,
Rob, aren't you sort of shooting yourselves in the foot to a certain extent? Because if brewers have to use a lot less, they pay you a lot less, or is it priced appropriately?
Essentially, they're twice the price. So, yeah, twice the price, use half as much. So typically, we'd say the brewer would save money because they are seeing that yield increase. But as far as revenue for us, we'd say nothing really changes. Yeah, I mean, we can kind of linked into this conversation about dosing, about sort of do you use all cryo, do you use cryo and T90? But generally speaking, yeah, they are twice as concentrated, just the same amount of raw hop material that goes into the pellet. It's just obviously a lot of that is removed during that separation process. So yeah, we're looking at about, for every one pellet, it's probably twice the raw hop weight has gone into producing that pellet, or kilogram. So one conversation we'll get onto sort of towards the end of this presentation is how these compare to other products on the market. That's probably what we get asked most. But yeah, say if you're using 200 grams of T90 in a dry hop, we would say to start with, look at using maybe 100 grams and then tweak it. Every brewery is different, even at homebrew level. And a commercial level, so play around with it, tweak it, yeah, use them wherever you would use pellets or whole cone hops. Don't boil them, don't really use them early on in the brewing process. They are formulated and designed to be used for aroma, so you don't want to just boil that and cook it all the way, because yeah, it's a waste, and it's an expensive waste. So use, you know, conventional T90 pellet at the start of the boil as you otherwise would, and you really want to load these. Moving on to the next slide. Load these in the latter stages of the brewing process. So late kettle, so 5 minutes before the end of boil onwards, whirlpool, flame out, and obviously heavily use them in the dry hop in an active fermentation situation, but maybe even a post-fermentation situation as well. So yeah, you might see some that have 22% alpha acid and think, oh, that's great, that's great for bittering. And you're free to do that, but we also know those pellets will be full of aromas and flavors. So it'd be a shame for you guys just to boil those for 60 minutes and remove that. So yeah, to use those at the later end of the brewing process is absolutely where we'd recommend. And excuse this rather wordy slide. I have sent some PDFs through to James for him to distribute, which is just some FAQs and some sort of overview of the product. But yeah, as I said before, we get asked a lot of questions about how they compare to other products on the market. Again, I'm always very mindful of talking about other hop companies' products. I think it's important for those big guys to discuss their products, but concentrated hop products have been around for 30, 40 years. Started off in Germany and America, sort of in the 70s and 80s as a way to get more efficiency throughout the brew house. But that was purely from an efficiency point of view, as opposed to maximizing aroma and flavor. So you may be familiar with products such as T45 pellets, things like that, and just a little overview of how excuse me, how our products compare to those. So yeah, the generic concentrated pellets are produced very similarly to typical T90 pellets that you guys are all used to. Again, it's a sifting process using cold temperatures. The point here is that it's cold temperatures produced via refrigeration rather than liquid nitrogen. We probably say the hops are treated at about -40 degrees centigrade. when we produce them. So I can't speak for what the other guys are doing, but it'd be more akin to sort of conventional refrigerated or frozen temperatures, maybe something like -10, -15. Some of this vegetable matter is often blended back in to produce a pellet that's roughly 45% of the raw hop equivalent, or RHE as we call it, which is where the term T45 comes in, and obviously the same for T90. The T90 pellet contains roughly 90% of the raw hop material that they started with. These concentrated pellets typically pelleted in an oxygen-rich environment at higher temperatures, often with 52 degrees C. So often, if, as you mentioned, James, if that temperature is not monitored, you can end up with pellets that are oxidized, but also baked hard and glassy, and therefore not fit for purpose. Whereas we use liquid nitrogen throughout, which helps us remove oxygen, but also keep those temperatures very cold. We typically pellet our cryo hops below 27 degrees Celsius. So at those temperatures, we would expect to see no degradation to the hop compounds, which is super important. And what's also really important is the sifting process happens only once. Essentially, when you think back to the lupulin glands that I showed you on an earlier slide, they are very small particles that are easily ruptured. So the cold temperatures help keep those cold, obviously, and firm them up. So if they do, meet a mechanical process, they're less likely to be ruptured or smeared, as we say. We can then retain as much of those into the final pellet as possible. And again, by only putting them through a sifting process once, reduce that risk of those compounds being damaged. So yeah, to reiterate, the whole process and the whole reason for the product existing is to capture and retain as much of those aromatic compounds as possible that we know exist in the hops. What we don't want to do is lose those to the heat of a pellet mill or leave them on a production floor. We want to put as much of those in the final pellet, and therefore put as much of those into the final beer. And so just an overview of some benefits. So again, we look at the uniform particle size, really helps from a production point of view. I don't know how many of you guys use plate chillers and have had to dismantle a plate chiller, but yeah, it's not fun. Been there, done that once, and not again. But I counterflow chiller after that. When you've got bits of T90 pellet or even some whole leaves stuck in there that you can't get out. We have a product that's got nearly twice the resin content of T90 hop pellets, and therefore, a much greater contribution of hop flavor and aroma. Point here about hop creep. Hop creep, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the term. There's so much research going on from hop companies globally at the moment. It's still a bit of an unknown. But we have seen sort of a correlation between hop creep and obviously beers that have been heavily dry hopped. The main reason for hop creep occurring is from all that excess vegetable material being introduced. There are some very small chain sugars in there, and therefore enzymes, which can then also break down any residual sugars in your beer, and therefore cause excess re-fermentation in your final package. And what we like to refer to as bottle bombs or fobbing kegs or whatever it is. But either way, it's not fun. So by removing a lot of this vegetable material, we can sort of be more confident with producing heavily dry hop beers, knowing that there's less vegetable material going in there. Another kind of benefit, I guess, especially at a commercial scale, if you're using 5 tons of Citra a year, but you can reduce that to 2.5 tons of Citra Cryo, that's, a good portion that you're not shipping in terms of weight and room on a truck. So obviously, there's implications there and benefits there from a environmental and sustainability point of view. Again, as we mentioned, you can see increased yields through the brew house. Potentially over time, you see some savings as well. Again, it could be 5,000 hectolitres over a year, or it could be 3 bottles every batch, both equally important. And kind of an added benefit, really. So yeah, sort of no real negatives to using cryo. I know I'm paid to say that, but I stand by it. If you've had any beers that you've seen have cryo hops in, I'm sure you would agree that the intensity of aroma and flavour is really up there. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to kind of represent those and offer those to you at a homebrew level. I'm certainly excited because I homebrew, so to be able to use those in smaller quantities is really cool. So I think that's the final slide. I have got, again, I sent this through to James. There's some nice sample recipes for you guys to just have a look at.
Yeah, for those that are on Slack, they are on the meeting channel. I posted it earlier on today. All of the PDFs are on there.
A few more of those. But yeah, essentially, got one little save the date actually, which is kind of good timing with this meeting, James. Actually, we've got a webinar tomorrow, in fact, at 6 p.m. UK time on Cryo. But the guys talking will be some of our sales staff from the US, some of our production team as well, the guys who work on the Cryo line. We've got Brad Benson, excuse me, from Stoop Brewing in Seattle. Sort of we can discuss the brewing element of it. So there's a link there as well. I think it's on Facebook Live and YouTube. So you guys are welcome to tune in. I think you just have to input your email address to register. But yeah, there's probably a bit more in-depth look at the sort of production side of things, sort of on the history and that actually using them firsthand in a commercial brewing environment. So that might be worth a watch. It's not the ideal time. I can see it's 6 p.m, but it will be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, definitely check that one out. But that is me. So if anyone's got any questions about anything, then yeah, we can go for it.
Cool.
I'd quite like to kick off if I can.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just in terms of flavour, if we assume that you make the same beer with standard T90s and Cryo, using half as much of Cryo, of course, is the flavour the same, given that you've removed a lot of the vegetative material, which must contain some flavour components?
Yeah, so an excellent question. So what our actual recommendation is to still retain and use a small proportion of T90s. Obviously, those vegetal and grassy aromas in high concentrations aren't particularly pleasant, but it's all about, you know, building a palette of flavours that's most rounded and most kind of complex. So you do want to actually keep a few T90s in just to offer that kind of vegetal characteristic. Again, everyone's different. We know a number of breweries who've gone, right, we're just going to move everything over to Cryo. We love Cryo, we love the beer it produces, whereas some will use it 50-50. I've got a calculation here, bear with me, on a separate presentation, which kind of gives you an overview of the ratios to use. I just need to do a bit of a few sums. Where are we? So if you're using, for example, 50 grams of T90 pellets, we would say instead to use 20 grams of Cryo and 10 grams of T90 at those ratios, just to kind of retain some of those vegetal characteristics, which in small doses, as I say, aren't unpleasant and actually contribute to a more complex and more interesting flavor profile.
Okay, that's good, thanks. And can I also ask, there's a lot of discussion about thiols as a flavor compound. Are they preserved in Cryo hops, or do we lose thiols?
Great question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. What I would say is thiols are sulfur-derived compounds, which typically are the most sensitive of all the hop compounds. I mean, you've got 1,000+ hop compounds, but thiols are usually some of the first compounds that heat will evaporate or remove, or even just the rigors of fermentation will probably work on those. If you ever dry hopped with something high in thiols, like something like Summit or Columbus, something like that, you might notice that during fermentation you'll get a real sort of off gas of these sort of not always pleasant aromas. So the low temperatures from the cryo production will certainly help preserve as much of those as possible.
It would be the free thiols, but the bound thiols would not be volatile. So are they still in the Cryo hops, or have we lost those?
Great question. I don't know the answer to that one, actually. They may look into that on the webinar tomorrow, but I can certainly find out and drop something back to James for sure.
I know that the Cryo pot mentions about thiols, sort of elevating levels of various things, so the geranium, the mineral, and it mentions thiols in there as well. So I don't know whether that's across all of the Cryo, but
for the blend, especially the Cryo pot blend, we've looked to kind of maximize as many thiles in there as possible to kind of leave as many in the final product.
That's great. Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you out. I'm interested.
No,
in thiles, so-
ask any question. Yeah, and that's the benefit of having kind of a leading team in the US. If I don't know anything, I can just ask the question, and I'll happily, feed those back to James for him to kind of give to the group. So yeah, all questions, easy or difficult, welcome. So yeah.
Robbie, how do they get over here? Because obviously you take great care in your process, but then do they get stuck in a container ship for 10 weeks in various temperatures?
They do get stuck in container ships for many weeks, but fortunately at cold temperatures.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got an amazing logistics team who kind of, I don't know how they get hops over here sometimes. So they're all staged, as we said, staged through Antwerp and then down to our facility in Belgium. So yeah, but the most important thing is they're kept cold throughout that entire process. Yeah.
And when will we start seeing them over here in the UK?
So we've already got some hops listed with the homebrew shop down in Aldershot. I've been in the hop industry for about 6 years now, and I used to deal with the owner at a previous job, and he's been desperate to get his hands on some for some time. One key thing for us is that we don't permit anyone to repack the hops, because we know we've taken the utmost care in packaging them in their own branded packaging and storing them, and for someone to then open that packaging and repackage them in conditions that might not be optimal is a risk we're not prepared to take. So yeah, I had to keep this guy sort of at bay for a number of months. But yeah, the homebrew shop down in Aldershot, I think it's just the homebrewshop.com, has a special section just for Yakima Chief hops on the website. So he's got a good range of T90s, but also Cryo on there as well. There you go. Thank you, Steve. Perfect. So those are ready to go as and when, I believe.
Okay, excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, yeah. Go for it.
Hi, Robbie. I spoke to you at BrewCon for
yes,
quite a
I remember.
while.
Yes.
I've got, well, there's two things I was going to ask. I was going to ask about the quantity, but you've explained that. I know one of your competitors does Lupomax, which I think is supposed to be a similar type thing.
Yeah.
I can get Citra for 48.25 a kilo. If I buy goodness knows how many packs of 50 grams of yours, it comes to 148. Yes. Are you going to start doing it in bigger amounts? Because 50 grams, we'd need about 4 packs per brew.
Yeah, so kilo packs are in the works. They have actually been produced. It's just finding a retailer to work with on those. So we do have a distributor of our commercial products. You might be familiar with Brookhouse Hops up here in Worcestershire. They can distribute our products to commercial brewers. So whether they might start opening up the 1 kilo packs to home brewers is a possibility. Another kind of exciting possibility, we are working on an e-commerce portion on our website, so you guys can buy them direct.
Right.
It's operational in the EU. It's a little more difficult to get that set up now. We're not in the EU. We won't go into that now.
I didn't vote for it.
But it's caused a lot more sort of there's issues with VAT and taxation and things that I don't understand. But it's more problematic to get it set up in the EU. Sorry, in the non-EU. So that's why we need to lean more heavily on retailers. But they're confident they get it done. It just might take a little longer. So
okay. So watch this space. Have you tried people like Brewers Select and so on that sell bigger quantities?
So in terms of distributors, we just work exclusively with Brookhouse, but we've had conversations with Malt Millet and Brew UK as well. So
I'm talking about ones that sell big amounts, like Brewers Select, that sell to breweries.
So we did just do a Brewers Select actually, but then they're not someone we'll be partnering with moving forwards. I think they've got an agreement with another hop company again. I think there's
right. Okay.
There. But I know the Malt Miller especially. They've got more of a presence in the microbrewery scene as well. So they might be a good fit there. But again, there's things to do in the background. But yeah, we know that 1 kilo packs for sort of the larger home brewer could be perfect as well.
Well, we buy Citra in 5 kilos, so.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Keep moving. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll find some middle ground there for sure. But yeah, 1 kilo in T19 Cryo, we know it's a great option. So yeah, it's in the works. So yeah, we'll try and get it done as soon as we can.
Thanks.
Yeah. No worries.
A wider question, if I may, Robbie, I'm sure you've been asked this many times, but
yeah,
you have a glut of hops following the pandemic, and a lot of hop growers, producers did. The same with you.
It's been difficult for sure. Excuse me. One difference for us is being grower owned. We're much more directly linked, or the supply chain's shorter, I should say. So, you know, it's basically brewery to sales representative to growing team. So there's no merchants there. There's no kind of layers of brokers there to kind of have these different conversations with. It was difficult for sure. We're still seeing some impacts. But, you know, a lot of the sales team we've got tactics in place maybe to kind of, people take a year off, they can reduce their quantity over a year if they have got a backlog. But yeah, there was a time where obviously not a lot of beer was getting made. That hops had been committed to, so it was tough. But again, being directly linked to the supply chain, we can just, you know, choose to grow less, choose to grow more. We can make that decision pretty quickly and be quite reactive with it. The fortunate thing with American hops is that typically you can get a crop or a good portion of a crop from a first year plant. You know, you're not relying on a plant to, you know, be 5 years into maturity before it starts yielding properly. That's the benefit of the crazy climate over there, or the climate that's perfect for hop growing. So yeah, we're well positioned to kind of be more reactive in the market in that sense. So, but yeah, it was. I joined in March 21, so kind of, I guess, not in the thick of it, but still, you know, it was still an ongoing situation, and I know there was a lot of difficult conversations going on globally. So I don't envy some of the sales team in that sense now.
I had a kind of follow-up question, I guess, to that. What's the shelf life of Cryo compared to, say, T90 and to Leaf?
The same. So we put 3 years on the hops because we have to, because they're entering the food chain. Any of you guys who've, you know, had hops know that if they were unopened and they kept frozen or very cold, they can be 5 years old and still be, you know, brilliant. It's all about, you can't stop hops aging, but you can slow it down as best you can. And you know, the two main things there are as little oxygen as possible and as low temperatures as possible. I think I said to you guys and Dave, we've got a customer on the continent who insists on storing at -25 because they believe the science proves that's the best thing to do. We ourselves store the hops at 0 degrees. You could say colder the better, but when you're chilling a 6,000 square meter warehouse, there is a difference in cost at -25 to 0. So you've got to be pragmatic about these things. But the main thing is with the packaging and the storage, after 3 years to 5 years, there may be sort of a slight reduction, maybe in aroma or alpha acid, but there's no introduction of off flavors, which is the real key thing. You may see some hops that are 3 years old that haven't been stored correctly, that smell like cheese or worse things. So it's all about eliminating that. So yeah, and that's why we've kind of taken it on board to start producing and offering these hops ourselves, because, you know, there's a number of retailers across Europe who do an amazing job, and we have no concerns about their processes, but there's others that perhaps don't, but they're putting Yakima Chief logos on the branding. So it's all about kind of retaining that ownership of these brands. You know, the growers have spent a lot of time and effort growing them. We want to make sure that the hops are in peak condition when they reach you guys. So yeah, short answer, we'd say 3 years legally because we have to, but often much longer if stored correctly. So
cool, thanks.
Oh, Robbie, I had a quick one. Have the given that you're losing the vegetal matter and some of those flavors, has there been, do you think it will drive a resurgence in any of the more classic hops like Cascade, where you know, with the lower alpha acids, where you used to use maybe a bit more, or where the sort of the, I don't know, maybe the lighter flavors will stand out more now?
Possibly. I think that's, yeah, it's a really interesting point. Obviously, things like the Citra Cryo, Mosaic Cryo, Simcoe Cryo, we know are hugely aromatic, hugely punchy, but I think it's a really interesting way of looking at things like a Cascade Cryo or an Amarillo Cryo, Centennial Cryo even. Chinook's my favorite hop, and Chinook Cryo is absolutely bonkers. It often brings more out of these hops than you'd ever previously knew was there. So yeah, I'd you know, we have a number of popular varieties, and you can imagine which ones they are, but the cryo process on some of these hops is really, really interesting to see, just how it changes them or how it elevates them. So yeah, definitely explore those if you get the opportunity to. A Chinook Cryo in a New England IPA or something is really interesting to look at.
Cool, thank you.
And actually, on a side note, we do actually, that waste material isn't wasted. It's not waste material. We do actually have another product line which we hope to, to offer to you guys soon as well. I know, is it Rob, I believe, in your crew only really brews lagers or German styles, I think he was saying. So that bract material we actually form into a new product called American Noble hops. So we then pelletize that, and you have something like a Chinook, Citra American Noble hop, which might have an alpha acid content of about 5% and have a lot of qualities similar to that of a Sarts or a Mittelfrüh or something, but also with a bit more of a fruit citrus characteristic. So we've had a lot of success with that with some large lager breweries in Asia, actually, who, it's a good price because, it's kind of free material in that sense, but it's still got lots going for it. So yeah, that's sort of another side note to the whole cryo conversation, which is quite interesting.
Now, Robbie, based on the huge range of hops are there and all the different flavors and characteristics, does that actually alter the sort of cryo process in any way, or is it a standard process for all the hop varieties?
No, so because some of the hops have, you look at something like a Cascade compared to a Sabro, the oil contents differ massively, so they're treated differently throughout the process, mainly sort of at the point of pelletization, because the natural oils in the hops will act as a natural lubricant through the pelleting machinery. If it's got higher oil, you can maybe push it through a bit faster. If it's got less oil, you have to be a bit more softly. So they've kind of designed not recipes, but processes that are unique to each hop variety, which means they're all handled differently throughout. So they've got benchmark data now to know that we'll need to be a bit more careful with Cascade, or we can handle Sabro or something a bit differently. So yeah, each hop variety is treated differently. It's not sort of a one process for all.
Okay.
Robbie, I've got another one, if I may. I was just looking at your recipes, and when you've got the adding the cryo in the whirlpool, you've got it at 96 centigrade. What's it like? Does it still give off the a good flavor and aroma if it's down to say 70, 75, which some people do, to adding any bitterness at that point?
I mean, so we've got an in-house brewery in our facility where our brewing manager, basically that's his job all day, which is brilliant. I'd like to have his job. He's our R&D brewer. So he formulates this. I mean, 96 degrees, typically I would whirlpool more like 80 degrees. But it's kind of a how long's a piece of string kind of question. Again, if you ask any commercial brewery in the country how they dry hop or what temperature or when they dry hop, you'll get a different answer every time. Yeah, I mean, 96 is maybe a bit warmer than I've previously seen for whirlpool temperatures, but again, people writing these recipes I trust implicitly, so I I would certainly go with that for a trial and then tweak it to maybe what you've had success with, or what you think might be work better for you. So yeah, I think on this one again, they're dry hopping at 22 degrees C, which again I would probably more likely dry hop at something like 18. So yeah, it's one of those conversations within brewing, isn't it, that everyone's got their own little method, I think, that works for them.
Okay, cool. I'll give it a whirl.
Yeah, absolutely, literally.
So to speak.
Yeah.
Robbie, did you say you had an EU storefront?
Say again, sorry?
Did you say you had an EU storefront?
We do at the moment just for B2B, just for our brewery partners at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's still something going in the back end before we open the gates to potentially thousands of keen home brewers. We want to make sure everything's right. But yeah, that's coming. EU, we think maybe hopefully by the end of the year, and then the UK to follow as soon as possible, really. So obviously we know you guys want to, e-commerce is huge, and a lot of people prefer to buy online where possible. So yeah, we're working on that as quickly as we can, really. So yeah, but at the moment the EU one is just for brewery partners.
Who's your agent in Australia?
So we work with Cryo Malt in Australia. You know those guys? Yeah, we're partnered with those guys. I think they're in Melbourne, I think. Yeah. So when they were at the start, when they were talking about you being 11 hours in front, so you're in Oz then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
I'm in Sydney.
That's got to be an early start for you then.
Yeah, we were chatting before the off about the dreadful impact of daylight saving on attending things like this. No.
Right. So you're, what is it, sort of 5 a.m. start, something like that?
No, it's 6 o'clock. So it's
Okay.
coming up to 7:30 now. But it's daylight is happening, so that's good.
Wonderful. Oh yeah, I admire the commitment, Peter. That's wonderful. Excellent. Is there any other questions at all, or more than happy to stick around?
Yeah, please do. I mean, I'm sure other questions will come up. Just sort of trying to think about stuff as you're going through the whole presentation.
I've got a question here. With all these new products, what are the thoughts about hop oil, especially the more recent versions that I've heard of?
Yeah.
If we're after getting more and more, well, sort of less out of whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
So as a company, we like to be innovative, but also balancing it with releasing too much. There's 150 plus varieties globally. We certainly have the capacity and the ability to produce hop oils. It's not something that we're really looking at doing at the moment, mainly because we're really happy with what Cryo does. We know hop oils, I think, may be a bit of a Marmite product in terms of those who, have used them and get on with them, swear by them. But I know some brewers I've spoken to feel like there's something a bit artificial about them. So it's always something we're considering, but what we don't want to do is just sort of release products onto the market in response to other products, if that makes sense. We kind of like to lead the conversation if possible, I would say. Cryo's been around for 7 years, really, when it first sort of started to be explored, and now it's really hitting its stride. It's probably our biggest growing product globally. We see some, really big, even traditional brews have started to adopt it into some core products, which is really exciting. And obviously it's grown side by side with the craft movement as well. So yeah, kind of the best is yet to come in that sense. But yeah, hop oils are always a topic of discussion internally. Should we be doing that? Should we be in that space? Should we? And we do produce obviously alpha and bittering extracts because the demand for those globally is enormous as well. from the aroma point of view, and maybe things like the liquid dry hop products you see, it's not something we're looking at the moment anyway.
No, it's just interesting because I mean, I can foresee that, of course, most of the hop oil products at the moment are very new, and they'll probably go through the same problems that, say, you had with producing powders, and then realizing that you've got to pelletize or whatever. So there's a learning process, and that does take time. And getting it right takes time. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I mean, we have seen people report that with some of these products, they're not particularly easy to use. You either have to, they're quite thick, so you have to either dilute them with hot water or hot wort and then produce a slurry and then dose them in line. Whereas obviously cryo hops, you can just, for want of a better term, chuck them straight in. There's no special process or special way of using them. So yeah, it's, you know, something to consider for sure. We're not sort of removing ourselves in that conversation, but it's not sitting at the forefront of our minds anyway.
Thank you.
No worries.
I was just going to ask: are there any, in terms of hops, other than everybody using more and more mosaic or something like that? Are there any sort of general trends you're seeing in terms of hops?
One thing for us is, I think you've got to be looking for different flavors, and I think that's why things like Sabro and Talus came out, because why look for another Citra hop when you've got Citra? You know, Citra is incredible, and it's the biggest grown hop in the US now by some margin. So looking for different options. It was a shame I had some samples arriving that didn't arrive in time for my visit to you guys, but some of our HBC hops, which we hope to produce at homebrew level. May have seen HBC 630, so that's got a real kind of red fruit berry aroma, or really real notes of raspberry and cherry, which aren't flavors that you've typically seen in hops before. So you know that can fit sort of a nice niche there. We've got a new variety coming out, or that's out, an experimental called HBC 586, which is sort of incredible. It smells just like mango sorbet to me, but also with some vanilla ice cream in there as well. Again, mango is something that's often associated with hops and beers, but it's also quite a hard flavor compound to capture in a hop or breed into a hop. Mango is quite a complex flavor. So yeah, to have a hop that's quite expressive in mango is quite exciting. We've got another one, HBC 472, which almost has like a bourbon kind of aroma, and it almost makes the beer smell like tastes like it's been barrel aged, which again is kind of mad. That's related to Sabro. So it's all about kind of innovating and sort of fitting into sort of the whole flavor palette. Obviously, we're doing this 10 years in the past. That's the difficult part. Some of these hops were first identified 10 years ago. So it's kind of staying ahead of trends that are going to come in 10 years' time. So that's the difficult part. I think for us, yeah, it's all about offering a point of difference and offering different flavors. Do we need, another hop that's piney, citrusy, and resinous when we've got Simcoe, which is stunning? So that's kind of where we're at with that, I would say.
Has anybody got any other immediate questions? It sounds like Robbie's going to hang around for a bit anyway, but if not, then thank you very much, Robbie, for coming and presenting.
Most welcome.
You said it earlier on, like there's other subjects as well you could cover in future.
Yeah, so I know I recalled having a conversation with Jennifer at BrewCon actually about the survivable compounds and the Cryo blend, which is kind of our newest product. So some of the research behind that is kind of not been done before. So we'd love to dig into that. I'll have to do a bit more homework because there's a lot of hop chemistry involved in that. So I need to make sure I get my hop compounds correct, because there's a bit meatier than Cryo, but I'd love to explore that with you, and I'll just see if I can get some samples out to you guys as well, to sort of assess alongside that. Or we could even do that maybe at your next lab open. We could do something on that there perhaps, which would be quite fun, and get hands on with the hops, because that's the best thing. And yeah, just look at maybe some new varieties. We could look at some experimental varieties as well. some of the ones I mentioned just then. Some have been around for probably 10 years, some have been around for more like 5 years. So again, to sort of look at those and give you a chance to explore some of those and brew some beer with those as well would be really cool. And being part of that kind of experimental program, potentially looking at the next name variety in there, which would be really cool. So yeah, there's plenty of stuff we can dig into for sure.
Cool. I'll sort something out with that, and certainly it'd be good to have you at Lab Open. I mean, on the Sunday particularly, we have lots of people come from all over. So you got hundreds of people there on the Sunday. So we quite often have had talks and things like that there as well. So it's definitely an option. Yeah, we'll talk about that. In the meantime, though, yeah, thank you for presenting, and yeah, everybody could just say a little.
No worries. Cheers, guys. Thank you. It's good to do stuff like this. So no, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It's good.
And obviously, if you want to send us loads of samples to do some experiments with, then we'd love that as well. So
I could probably find some find some in the freezer, perhaps. Yeah.
We seriously have done stuff for yeast companies and things like that in the past, so it's always an option.
No, I speak especially on the experimental stuff, and obviously I know you guys haven't seen much cryo before, so I'm sure there's stuff we could do there for sure.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
I am going to go and quickly find another beer, but yeah, otherwise we'll sort of just chatter away a bit, and if people have got more questions that come up, that would be great. I don't know, Peter, if were you able to do a little tour of your brewery, or sort of
well, at least tell us what you're brewing.
Oh, I don't know. I think I'm not sure that I should divulge those wonderful secrets. The tour of the brewery. The brewery's back there, and there are 8 minutes to go of the mash before it ramps up to a mash out. This iMac thing is not a portable beast. The best I can do is point it in that general direction.
Fair enough. Well, I said I'm going to go and get a beer now, and yeah, so everybody sort of feel free to do the same or ask questions or whatever. Really, I think we'll kind of officially call it the end of the meeting, but I think there's obviously a bit of time to ask plenty more questions and things like that. Anyway, cool.
So